Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about a couple of big-time SEC games, the largest outdoor cocktail party, as well as A&M South Carolina. A couple of games that could go sideways and totally change up the SEC race. But at the end of the day, let's get into a couple of CFP races because this thing is getting very interesting. We've had a little bit of thinning out. We've had a couple of teams kind of bow out of this race, but we still got plenty of things to figure out. So let's break down these tiers and let's get into all of the craziness that could happen coming forward because there's quite a few hypotheticals. Frankly, I'll probably get into a couple of hypotheticals on Friday, so be on the lookout for that. But this one's going to be really interesting to break down, and we'll start with the certified title contenders. I only got two. As of October 30th, these are the only two teams that I can confidently say can compete for a title right this second. I know that sounds crazy because obviously more teams will find their way into this group. There is no doubt in my mind that we could see a Miami or a Texas A&M or a Ohio State, obviously, Penn State could find their way into this group. As of right this second, these are the only two teams that I'm looking at and saying those are championship caliber teams. They are playing championship football, and they seem to have the makeup of a championship team. Now, a lot of things can change this upcoming weekend, particularly for Ohio State and Penn State, but as of right now, I think there's a couple of holes on a number of different teams. I think these teams do the best job of covering those holes, which is the end goal here. But at the end of the day, I think for Georgia, feels like they turned a corner in that Texas game. Feels like they found a way to get that one done, put themselves on a path forward, and I think that offense still hasn't really found itself. I think if that run game gets going a little bit more, this team could look as terrifying as really any from the past couple of years for Georgia. And then for Oregon, this team just looks like a well-oiled machine right now. If you get that play from Dillon Gabriel, if you get that D-line, if you get that O-line in that run game, you are going to be a problem for pretty much everyone you play, and frankly, I'd be a little bit surprised if they didn't at least get to the semifinals of the CFP with the way that they're playing right now. So those are the two teams right now. It's going to get bigger, obviously, as we get deeper in the season. More teams will find their way up there as they start to fix some of the issues. I think Texas, with a couple of fixes, could very well be in this group. I think Ohio State the same, Penn State the same, and then Miami and Clemson, I think, are right there as well. But moving on to the teams that are CFP bound, I feel pretty good about them moving forward, but obviously still have some pitfalls ahead. The CFP bound group, it's bigger than just these five. These are just an example five, and I'll fill you in on the rest as we go down it. But for Texas, this team has taken a step back in my mind. The O-line just needs to play better. The recognition of blitzes and Quinn Ewers being able to put themselves in positions to win is not quite where it needs to be. Now, I have full faith in Quinn Ewers to turn it around. I think he played really good football against Vanderbilt for the most part. That being said, this offense is facing a lot of people playing very deep in the field with all of that speed. You're not necessarily getting the downfield passing game that you very much want. You're going to have to find a way to move the ball, one way or the other. The run game has to get going. This O-line has to start getting push again, or it's going to be a really, really tough stretch of the season where you lose a couple of games you're not supposed to, and you're on the outside looking in. So they still have plenty of work to do, but as of right now, they're in very good position to win out the rest of the way, find their way to the SEC title, and be firmly in the CFP mix at the end of the year. Then you have A&M, obviously another team in this conversation. They found their way kind of up to this group this past weekend with a win against LSU. I think they could lose to Texas at the end of the year and still be in. Obviously, if they won that game, went to the SEC title, they'd very much be in. In fact, there's a very interesting SEC title hypothetical that we can obviously break down on Friday that involves 4 11-1 teams and would be very confusing. But at the end of the day, this is going to be a very fascinating game between between those two teams at the end of the year. We could get to a place where A&M doesn't have to worry about that one. We could get to a place where they don't have to worry about it because they're fully out of the thing. So it's going to be really interesting to watch that one unfold. But as of right now, those two teams in Texas are firmly in the driver's seat to find their way to the CFP. For Ohio State, I think they're kind of in the Texas boat in my mind. I don't think they're necessarily bad, but the O-line and the injuries there are a real issue. I'm not necessarily sure they're going to be able to keep up against some of the very elite teams. I mean, even this weekend, it's going to get a little sketchy. Another team in this group would be Penn State, and Indiana, another team from the Big Ten. So a couple of those teams that they're going to have to play coming up, it's going to be tough to deal with if you have that O-line, if you have that approach. So they're going to have to get a little creative out there, and we'll actually talk about that Penn State-Ohio State game and a couple of the things that I think Ohio State can do to kind of fix that. We'll talk about that tomorrow. But moving forward to Iowa State, this is a big-time team. I think they've put themselves in such a good place, them along with BYU, kind of in the same boat here. Finding a way to be undefeated this deep into the Big 12 schedule is huge, because now you've set yourself up in a position where they're in a really good position where all you have to do is hold serve. All you have to do is hold your water, possibly go undefeated, even maybe take one loss, as long as it's not to that Kansas State team at the end of the year. You have the ability to go to the Big 12 title. And even if you lose that Kansas State game, if they've lost one before, you're more than fine. So it's kind of a confusing situation for Iowa State and BYU, but being undefeated in the Big 12 right now is not something I expected to see, and definitely puts them in the driver's seat to possibly make the Big 12 a two-bid league into the CFP. But then you move forward to Miami. This one, they're just kind of sitting pretty right about there. I don't necessarily think they're moving up and down right about now. Obviously, they have the ability to move up over the next couple of weeks, because if they can find that run game, if they can get that going, I think this offense becomes that much more scary. I think they have the ability to play more games the way that they need to, because you look at championship teams, they're all capable of winning those shootout crazy games that Miami's been capable of winning. They're also capable of slowing it down and winning slugfest, and that's something that Miami just hasn't quite proven to me. I definitely think they're capable of it, but gonna have to see it a couple more times. Clemson obviously is in this group as well. They handle business the rest of the way. They are firmly on their way to the CFP, and then you got a little bit of a bubble, and it's a pretty big group. Now you have these 5 to kind of choose from, but it's plenty others on here. But we'll start with that Colorado team. This team stays on the bubble just plainly because one slip in the next 4 games, they are out. They're out of the Big 12 championship. They're out of the CFP race without a doubt, especially with the loss to Kansas State already, who's also in this group actually. They are firmly out of the race if they lose one more game. That being said, they're a really dangerous team. They're going to need a little bit of help to find their way to the Big 12 title if they were to win the rest of their games. But at the end of the day, they're a very dangerous team, and I can see them somehow finding their way into that 4 seed. But we'll see what happens there. For Alabama, I think over in the SEC, you got Alabama, LSU, Tennessee are the 3 teams that I've kind of pegged in this group. And I think for Alabama, they're in a position where you take down LSU, you're pretty likely to roll the rest of the way. Obviously, you have that Auburn game at the end of the year going to be very tough, but a 10-2 Bama is getting in. There's a logjam at the top. I understand that, and there's going to be plenty of 11-1 or 10-2 or 11-2 teams that are left out because of Bama. It doesn't matter. Bama's getting in if they're 10-2. I can absolutely promise you that. LSU, the exact same thing. So the winner of that game, if they run the table the rest of the way, you can expect to see them in that 12-team playoff. For Tennessee, it's really just about that Georgia game. You win it, you're almost definitely in. You lose it, then you're probably in the same boat as Alabama, and you beat Alabama. So maybe you get the nod over them. It's going to be a nightmare in the SEC, is basically what I'm trying to say. Figuring that out is going to be a nightmare, and we'll see how they do it. But it could be a lot of SEC teams in there at the end of the day, but we'll deal with that later. Pitt is another team to watch here. They're really only on the bubble. They're undefeated. They're playing incredibly good football. The only reason they're on the bubble is they're underdogs by more than a touchdown this upcoming weekend against SMU, and then they got Clemson still on the schedule. They have every ability to go 10-2 this year, have a very good year, but be firmly on the outside of the CFP looking in. So there's going to be something interesting to watch. I think SMU's right in this place as well. You know, you win that Pitt game this upcoming weekend, 11-1, you could still be on the outside of the ACC title looking in, and then you're asking a lot of questions about where SMU fits into the CFP conversation as an 11-1 team with maybe not that huge marquee win that a lot of other teams have. But at the end of the day, a very talented team that very well could be in the playoff at the end of the day. And then you also have Ole Miss from the SEC. Forgot to bring them up a little bit earlier. Definitely a team that has the ability. They just got to make a run. They have no margin for error. They got to win the rest of the way, and then they're likely in, especially with the win over Georgia. But at the end of the day, for Notre Dame, they just got to continue what they're doing. They're in this for the same reason that Colorado is. They make one misstep in the next little bit, they're out. Now they should be favored in every one of those games by a pretty comfortable margin. They got USC at the end of the year. They got Army in a couple of weeks. So they have some tough games, no doubt about that. But it's one of those things that the NIU loss feels like it's kind of been shaken from everyone's mind. that'll go right back into everyone's mind if they lose again. I can promise you that. So this Notre Dame team, although they seem to be firmly on their way to a CFP, they're on the bubble until really the last day of the season. If they win that last game, are 11-1, then they are firmly CFP bound. Until then, they're firmly on the bubble. And for that last one, it's not just Boise State. It's just the group of 5. Because frankly, that's where everyone sits in the group of 5 until after championship weekend. They have to figure out where they stand. They got to win that game on the last weekend of the season to possibly get into the field. So if Army goes undefeated, wins their conference, they're getting in. No doubt about it. If they lose, I think it could be Boise State if they're able to run the rest of the way. If Boise State were to lose in the Mountain West Championship or something like that, I think Tulane could be a team that finds their way in if they're able to run the table in the American. Apologies there, but I think it's a really interesting group. It's a group that it feels like Boise State is setting the pace. It feels like if Army loses that Notre Dame game, that is the team you're going to be watching down the stretch. I still think Tulane has a shot here. They only have 2 losses to Oklahoma and Kansas State. I think they have the ability to possibly win out the rest of the way, win the American. If Boise State stumbles again, then they're firmly in. So a lot of teams from the group of 5 are still on that bubble. A lot of teams need to handle business the rest of the way in. Army, you could argue, is in the catbird seat. They just got the toughest game on the schedule of the group going forward. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this group. It's definitely going to thin out over the next couple of weeks. But then there's this team. There's actually a chance that Virginia Tech finds their way into the CFP, and I was looking at it initially and thought it has to be a million different things happening. It's got to be a couple of different things, but not necessarily all that crazy. So there's a number of different things that I guess have to happen here. First of all, they got to beat Clemson. They got to handle business the rest of the way. No doubt about that. They got to get to 9-3 on the season. They have to get to, I believe, 7-1 in their conference. I believe they only play 8 games, so 7-1 in that conference. They have to do that first and foremost. Then SMU could lose to Pitt this upcoming weekend. As long as Pitt loses to Clemson, you would have the tiebreaker there. You would have the ability to say, we beat Clemson, they lost to Clemson. It would be Virginia Tech against Miami in Charlotte for the ACC title. If Virginia Tech won that game, they'd be your 4 seed. Which sounds crazy. Frankly, they might not even be the 4 seed. They might be that other team that just gets slotted in there because of the automatic qualifier, but maybe that G5 team is the 4th team in there. So a lot of things to take into account here, but yes, Virginia Tech is still alive. Any misstep, even in the slightest, and some stuff that is out of their control. You know, they could beat Clemson, but then Clemson goes on to beat Pitt, and SMU goes on to beat Pitt, and then you have SMU in front of you. So a million different things can happen here, but technically, Virginia Tech is still alive for the CFP. But it's going to be awesome to watch this unfold. I believe there's about 21, 22 teams in the Power 4 that still have the ability to make it. That's got to be whittled down to about 10 or 11 over the next little bit, so it's going to be fascinating to watch that unfold. But let's take our third break here. When we come back, we got to talk about upset alerts. I got 6 games for you guys here that I think are very, very interesting this upcoming weekend, and we'll break them down right after this.